From a gameplay perspective, Mother 3's Chapter 5 is special, in that it is the only chapter in which the main cast stays together for its entire duration. They don't get separated and have to reunite like in Chapter 7, nor does Boney run off ahead of the group as we'll see in Chapter 8. Right now, it's just 4 misfit heroes, tasked with finding that infamously elusive hummingbird egg, and then destroying the Pigmask army's Tower of Thunder, responsible for destroying the homes of military recalcitrants, which is what our protagonists are. Yes, even the dog with lightning. The titanic turret at the top, which can be seen as early as Chapter 4, reveals the way in which the enemy is targeting those opposed to their reign. But how exactly are they generating that much energy to begin with? The answer lies with these enslaved electric catfish. They are poor creatures worked to exhaustion, much like the unfortunate Clayman puppets, as also introduced in the last chapter. But while the Claymen do their bidding without question, because they don't know any better, these catfish must be provoked in order to be useful to their pig masters. The catfish have to feel fear specifically, so the soldiers managing their output try and utilize new scare tactics to elicit surprise, which in turn equates to a higher rate of kilozaps per hour. In other words, they have to receive a shock in order to produce one. It's yet another way the opposition demonstrates abuse. These forlorn fishes are captives made to live in terror, relentlessly agitated and exploited for their power. Perhaps one positive to come from this is the fact that the Pigmasks have to make themselves look like fools, as they invent different ways to startle their victims, who are all adapting to their increasingly predictable methods. Not that these blundering boars needed any help in making themselves look bad, but still. The catfish's predicament is all the more motivation to put this place out of commission. And even though what their fabricated lightning is being used for isn't really a concern for the majority of Tazmily residents, who proudly display their acceptance of the army's rule so they aren't affected and fail to see a problem, we must trek on to liberate the few who still resist. As heartless as the oppressors are in general though, they are still human. And while it's most certainly a little too late, some of them are even beginning to realize that what they're doing is bad. Recognizing and admitting your wrongdoing is the first step towards change. And while this line here is made out to be more of a joke than a profound statement, Mother 3, from here on out, will continue stirring where it's most comfortable, in the morally gray, while unreluctantly dipping into the Vantablack, of course. Keeping on the topic of the Pigmask army, the existence of a clear hierarchy is starting to become more obvious. There are the pink uniformed foot soldiers, blue donned Pigmask captains, green-wearing majors, and cloaked-in white colonels. Following this chapter, we'll even see underwater patrols, amusingly called Navy Squeals. Besides color and size, in the case of the fierce Port Trooper, there are differences in their ensemble, like the colonel's capes, and while it's only a couple of pixels, you can tell that the captains have a kind of service medal pinned to their chests, while the majors have two, another way to denote their higher rank. Fasad's position is of course a type of commander, but there are others like him high up on the ladder, such as a mysterious character many refer to as the Commander. This masked man is unintentionally integral to the party's success in Chapter 5, because Lucas is conveniently mistaken for him and granted complete access to his adversary's confidential sectors because of it. Lots of players, myself included, might not question this first quote-unquote coincidence at the parent Clayman factory. I know that the reason for the mix-up is obvious in hindsight, but do keep in mind it wasn't very long ago that we passed Boney off as a human by giving him a shirt and a hat. These are just army grunts who aren't shown to be the brightest bunch, so mistaking this random kid for their commanding officer they may have never actually met in person is a bit strange, but it shouldn't be too surprising. When I first played this game, I remember adopting a just roll with it mentality for some of its scenarios. I was also eager to progress the story, so I couldn't put the USB controller, the Game Boy Advance, down, which means I didn't really spend a lot of time guessing what happens next. However, it is at this point in the game that keen players familiar with certain storytelling tropes can start to recognize which direction the plot is taking. Because this commander, the Masked Man, is Lucas's twin brother Klaus. And let me just say, I really like how the game handles this reveal. The last time we were shown Klaus, he was presumed dead. And so much has happened since then that he's likely not on the player's mind at this point. But all it takes is the right hint to establish the connection. So the game drops clues that the masked man might be a revived Klaus, with vague indications that become increasingly pronounced. So many, in fact, that I'm convinced Shigesato Itoi intended for players to reach this conclusion, or at least have a suspicion, before the game outright spells it out for them. Think about it. In Chapter 5, there's this case of mistaken identity, supported by the prominent orange color of his outfit, and the scrolling text at the end calling his profile youthful. Then in Chapter 7, when Lucas encounters him, the screen flashes in a notable way. It's similar to when Kumatora read Salsa's mind with telepathy back in Chapter 3, but when that happened, the screen flashed white. This time, a sort of teal-colored tint is applied that's only ever used in particular flashbacks, like when Lucas remembered his mom and how she'd help him get ready for the day. I'm betting that Lucas, and maybe even Klaus, both sense a strange familiarity here, but the feeling isn't powerful enough for them to recognize each other. In my opinion though, the strongest piece of evidence comes when it's time to actually face the masked man in battle for the first time, as the instrument linked to his attack sound is that of a sitar, which was heard only once before when we briefly fought by Klaus's side in the prologue. It seems that Kumatora is the first of your party to catch on. This is all important to mention because it shows that these subtleties are here if you're looking for them. So if you know someone who was maybe interested in experiencing Mother 3 for themselves but never did because they were spoiled about the masked man, I'd reassure them that it doesn't really matter. Besides, there are plenty more mind-blowing surprises in store that aren't as often spoken about, and simply knowing who the masked man is will in no way prepare you for what happens during the finale anyway. As for why Klaus is working for the Pigmask army and how he's even alive, these are both questions that the player can actually solve early on too. As incompetent and bungling as these swine soldiers are, their technology is no joke. I've already discussed how their happy boxes are most likely tools for mind control, with more explicit examples introduced later on in the story, so Klaus's memories were likely forcibly repressed using a similar means. As far as how he's alive, animals fused with machine parts that give them new abilities make up a good majority of the enemy's devilish chimeras. So with technology that advanced, surely they could use it to save a nearly deceased human, or to totally resurrect one who's already passed on. Resuscitating Klaus, in whatever state he was found in then, was probably the pig's first experiment of this caliber, and it was a success, so they repeated the process to rebuild Facade. Wait a minute, rebuild Facade? I've gotten ahead of myself here, but we may as well keep this train going. So do Lucas and company end him in this chapter? No, that's actually all Facade's doing. He sort of probably kills himself by slipping on a peel from one of the bananas the glutton's always gorging on. Facade may not be a human. That's right, he's secretly the last Magypsy Locria, a traitor to their kind. But even so, it's hard to believe that anyone could have survived that far fall from Thunder Tower. The state of his reconstruction when we do see him again is disturbing too. Horns have been implanted into his face, so he now requires a robot translator to speak on his behalf. And Facade's not just reassembled once, but twice. Better give him more horns then. Much like Darth Vader, questioning if Darth Sidious purposely designed his obsolete, uncomfortable suit to restrict him, I'm thinking that Porky just cruelly toyed with Facade here like all of the other chimeras he's helplessly mixed and matched. Facade's final words to Lucas preceding his true demise in Chapter 8 is that this is all just Master Porky's game after all. And speaking of Porky, if his dangerously immature frame of mind wasn't evident enough already, His Highness's playroom should be an appropriate indication of where he's at mentally. Mother 3 doesn't reveal that King P is Ness's neighbor from the second Mother game until much later, so if this room didn't tip you off in a first run-through, then it's fantastic in hindsight. I'll talk about this in much greater detail in my final episode for Dark Aspects of Mother 3, but when we do eventually encounter Porky, he looks a little different than he did in Earthbound, because he's now become decrepit, with the appearance of an old man housed in the body of a child. We learn that this is due to him abusing time travel. He hasn't aged like a normal person, so not even Porky himself knows how old he is now. What is clear is that he still possesses the mind of a child too, as he surrounds himself with infantile things while indulging in all this sickeningly naive violence. What he's become and how he got here is pretty sad to think about. Porky had an awful childhood that he ran away from, but despite that, he's desperately nostalgic and obsessively clings on to his past. Mother 3 develops and expands upon Porky's character pretty substantially here. It is in this very room that we first learn Porky may still consider Ness as a friend, which supports certain subtext from the previous game. In Mother 3, he keeps what's called the Friend's Yo-Yo, protected and heavily guarded in a special case. Trying to swipe it as Lucas is punishable by death. It's never confirmed that this Friend's Yo-Yo did indeed belong to Ness, but Itoi has stated that Porky didn't have any other friends. I interpret that Ness, his ultimate rival, was the closest person he ever had to a friend. Itoi himself then goes on to suggest that perhaps he'd always just been playing with Ness that whole time, paired with the fact that yo-yos were Ness's secondary weapon to baseball bats, both of which appeared frequently in Mother 2 but not 3, along with all of the other obvious homages to Ness's adventure in this room, then later on in New Pork City, and I have little reason to doubt the identity of this yo-yo's original owner. In different circumstances, maybe the two of them could have been good friends, but the time for that has long since passed, both metaphorically and literally, so it seems Porky just can't let go. The Masked Man, Facade, Porky, and his army. This video has been all about the villains of this game and the rush to obstruct their plans. So to cap things off, after a fateful fight inside the tower's generator room, Lucas and his friends manage an escape to, and then from, the top of the tower before it detonates. But they all fail to hang on to the Mother Pork ship that's carrying them. And, perhaps unbeknownst to them, the Masked Man too. Chapter 5 has been an exciting challenge fraught with risk all throughout, and it ended in an equally extreme way. Chapters 7 and 8, longer and even more intense. However, Chapter 6, Sunflower Fields, slows things down considerably. And it's needed as a brilliant break in the action. It stands as yet another reason one of Nintendo's darkest games shines brighter than most. That's next time on Dark Aspects of Mother 3. Thank you all for joining me.